We're a little more than halfway through what's been a messy economic year in Canada, from recession fears and trade tensions to rising unemployment and shifting inflation. It's been anything but predictable. Tourism in the US may be down, but domestic travel in Canada is on the rise. So, where do we really stand? Joining us again to help make sense of it all is Douglas Porter. He's a chief economist at the Bank of Montreal. Doug, thank you so much for coming back on Just Good Business.
It's my pleasure, Alan. It's good to see you again.
Now, in your last appearance back in May, you said two of the most important economic trade indicators that you look at are the unemployment rate and the inflation rate. So let's begin with the unemployment rate, which currently sits at 6.9%, slightly down from 7 in May. You had predicted that with trade issues, that number might go higher. Do you still think that's the case?
I do. I will tell you that I've been somewhat pleasantly surprised at how the unemployment rate has remained relatively flat in the last couple of months. I think that's good news. I think that speaks to the bigger picture overall, that Canada has been a little bit less hard hit by the trade war than what we believed at the start of the year. But I still think that firms are very cautious about hiring. We've seen a very big run up in the youth unemployment rate, and I suspect that because the economy is still going to struggle to grow in the quarters ahead, that we're likely to see the unemployment rate back up a little bit in the next 6 months or so to a bit above 7%. But we do think it's not going to rise as high as we had earlier projected.
Okay, well, let's talk about inflation then. As of June, the inflation rate was 1.9%, slightly down from May's 1.7. In your last appearance, though, you weren't too concerned about the inflation rate going up significantly. You were more concerned about the impact on growth, on GDP. How's that played out in the last few months?
Yeah, that I would say the inflation has more or less come in as we expected. It's been held down definitely by a nice tailwind from lower global energy prices and the removal of the carbon tax. So energy prices have really gone a long way to holding down overall inflation. It's below 2%, as you mentioned. The Bank of Canada aims for 2%. So really no big story there. Unfortunately, if we look beyond that drop in energy prices, the Bank of Canada's so-called core measures of inflation are still running at around 3%. That's a bit too high for comfort. It has been sticky. It's one of the main reasons why the Bank of Canada has stopped cutting interest rates for now, because they are still a little bit worried about that core story.
No, so you mentioned interest rates, and yes, for the last 4 months, the interest rates haven't changed, 2.75%. If things continue the way they are, where do you see it at the end of this year?
So I will tell you quite flatly that we are among the most dovish on this file. We are more aggressive than others, looking for the Bank of Canada to cut 3 more times late this year and into next year. So we see their overnight rate going from 2.75 now to 2% by early in 2026. We might be a little bit off on the timing, but our view simply is that the economy is struggling to grow. We think eventually that will chip away at inflation. And the way the Bank of Canada looks at it is interest rates right now are exactly in the middle point of what they consider to be neutral. I think there's a very good case that interest rates should go below neutral when you're dealing with all this trade uncertainty and you've got an unemployment rate that's relatively high and rising.
Not in time for my mortgage renewal, unfortunately, but I think we got a pretty good rate back in May. Now, since you've been on, let's talk about the big scary word recession. I've read mixed reports about the possibility of recession in Canada. Early on, it seemed inevitable. Then there was some cause for optimism that perhaps it wouldn't be that bad. In your opinion, are we going to see recession in Canada this year?
So this is one area where we've slightly changed our call to the good. Previously, we had penciled in 2 quarters of negative GDP, which meets some people's definition of a recession. We still think the second quarter, when all is said and done, will have declined a bit because exports had a big pullback. But we're now cautiously optimistic that the economy will be about flat to even grow a bit in the summer months, and then start to mildly expand as we move into late this year and next year. So we think this won't quite rise to the definition of a so-called technical recession. And the really true definition of a recession is a broad-based, deep decline in the economy across a number of categories, and we're just not seeing that. It's very focused on the sectors that are being affected by tariffs, and that's steel and aluminum, lumber, and autos. But aside from that, the economy actually has held up relatively well.
Well, that's good news. Talking a little bit about, the elbows up or buy Canadian movements, they've had a few months now to show their impact. And we've seen reports of decreased travel to the U.S. In June, I had Jeff Calderwood on from the National Golf Course Owners Association of Canada. He was pretty positive on a strong year for Canadian golf courses, which, usually translates to strong tourism. We're more than halfway through the summer. Unfortunately, how has tourism been?
I would say overall, this has been a pretty positive story. We have seen a decline in U.S. visitors to Canada, by the way, but I believe that's been more than offset by, people staying at home and traveling within Canada, and also international visitors as well. Certainly, there's a lot of anecdotal and some real economic numbers that suggest that travel has been relatively positive. And I will say, when it comes to Buy Canada, this is where an individual Canadian can make a lot of difference.
Okay.
It doesn't really matter if you buy a jar of pickles, that's made in Canada or the US, or, a bottle of ketchup. Where it really matters is if you travel, say, in Banff or Halifax versus Florida or Arizona, that can mean, a difference of thousands of dollars. And that's where Canadians can individually make a really big difference, and
Sure.
Where Buy Canada can matter for the economy. And I think it has.
Mm-hmm. And to that point, we've seen some interprovincial trade barriers lifted, which is great news. I think there's still a lot of work to be done there. Is it too soon, though, to see any effects on the Canadian economy for that?
I think it is a bit soon, and certainly we've had some good news on that front. We've seen a lot of provinces getting on board and doing what they can, and of course the federal government is leading the charge. I will tell you, lay my cards on the table here, that I'm in the camp that believes it's not going to ultimately be that big of a deal for the Canadian economy, and it's mostly in the services sectors, not so much in tradable goods,
Sure.
Where we'll actually see an impact. But look, anything we can do to help support the economy, I'm all for it. I mean, I don't mean to downplay it. I think it's certainly a positive step in the right direction. I just don't really see it in the economic data yet.
Right. Well, let's shift focus quickly to small business in Canada, since that's our target demographic here. I recently had Dr. Sarah Burrows on from Queen's University to talk about, among many things, the silver tsunami phenomenon that's seen small business owners aging into retirement without a succession plan in place. And as a result, many of these businesses are simply closing down. Now, are you seeing any of this effect on the Canadian economy?
Well, and first of all, of course, demographics is something we don't always talk about each and every week. But I would say one really important force that we're seeing in all kinds of areas and small business as well is the peak year for births in Canada was in the late 50s, early 60s. And so effectively, we're right in the middle of the very peak of retirement right now. Of course, people retire at all different ages now, but the median retirement age still is 65.
Yeah.
So we're right at the very peak right now. And we are seeing it in lots of different economic statistics, including the labor force. And yes, in terms of new business creation. And we have seen much slower new business creation recently. The last thing I'll wrap up on just on that topic is, encouragingly though, when I look at small business sentiment, we've seen a really nice pickup in the last couple of months. I mean, small business sentiment was really hit hard early this year.
Sure.
On all the uncertainty around the trade war, but it's made a nice comeback in recent months. And I think that speaks to the fact that the trade war really so far has been focused on some very large industries like autos and metals, and it has spared a number of small businesses, at least up to this point.
Well, to that end, do you see any emerging economic trends that small businesses might be overlooking that they should be preparing for?
Well, I hate to, bring up the trade war again, but it's not over.
Right.
As I said, so far Canada's been let off relatively light compared to other economies, but we're in arguably the most uncertain situation of any country, because we haven't been granted a 90-day reprieve like Mexico and China. We haven't reached a deal like Japan or the European Union. We're kind of in this weird limbo with the USMCA coming up for official review next year. So unfortunately, that area of uncertainty just has not gone away, and I don't think we're done with that file just yet. So I think it's still going to be the number one story over the next 6 to 12 months for the Canadian economy and for small businesses.
What about economic myths or misconceptions that you often encounter that you'd like to debunk for our listeners?
Well, of course, I give a lot of public presentations, and I hear a lot of the same questions over again. It's tough to distill it down to just one, but I guess if I were to generalize it, it would be, look, these are not the worst of economic times. I mean, for instance, one question I get a lot is, are we going into stagflation? Right. And I am old enough, frankly, to remember the 70s. That was real stagflation. That's when we had, double-digit unemployment rates, double-digit inflation. We're a long way from both of those.
Right.
Even though inflation feels bad now, the reality is, like I said, it's close to 2%. The unemployment rate, it's not great. It has gone up, but it's not bad. It's, at a little bit less than 7%. I can remember 13% unemployment rate at one point. So we are a long way from stagflation. And while it has been a bit challenging in recent years, this has not been a bad economy overall. I know people don't like to always accept that, but I've certainly seen many, many tougher situations than what we're in right now.
I appreciate the positive viewpoint you're putting on this and the context you're offering, because you're right. Like if we look, historically, numbers have been a lot worse and scarier. Where can folks follow you to learn more about your work and maybe the work that BMO's doing?
So most of what we produce is on our website. You do not need a password. Just go to BMO Economics, and you can find most of what we create there. If you only want to follow one thing, I would say our weekly focus publication is probably our flagship publication. And not everybody has a huge appetite for economic information, but that's the one I would direct people to.
All right. And I'll include links to those sites in the show notes for this podcast. Doug, once again, thank you so much for coming back on. I hope to have you back on again, maybe in another couple of quarters, and we can talk about, whether you were right.
By all means, and always happy to join you.
All right. Thank you so much, Doug.